For this year, I was kind of out of a ride. I reached out to Jeff Zwart, a friend of mine and a friend of Joey's, and was kind of like, do you have any opportunities that I could drive? You know, I want to be a part of this kind of historic year. He was like, let me get back to you in a couple of weeks. I might have something special.
So Rhys called and said, I hear you've got something up your sleeve that you're cooking up. And I said, yes. He said, you should probably come over, you know, and take a look at it. So I think the next day he showed up, showed him around the car. We struck a plan and shook hands, which was really very exciting because, you know, working with Rhys is going to be the ticket.
I placed this call kind of at the perfect time, and sometimes that's all it takes. And that was to drive the Porsche 991 GT3R twin turbo that these guys were building. Now, the interesting part came along in the fact that I've never raced a Porsche before. This was quite a different dynamic for me. So A, I was excited. B, I wasn't certain what I could manipulate in what direction, and that's really where the bond between Joey and I started.
We started off with the test at thermal and some of my client track car builds, just to get his gears turning, feeling that kind of power in a rear engine layout. I wanted him to be familiar and comfortable so that we could develop the chassis.
It was really just a great foundation of feeling that rear grip, and it is pretty intense. It was a great foundation to walk away from that day a couple of weeks prior to running the real race car to kind of set my tone of where I needed to go with the race car setup. The interesting thing about Pikes Peak, again, from a development standpoint and preparation standpoint, is not so much where you test and what the race is. It's really understanding what happens on race day, and you really need to experience that to then back out of that to how you need to test. The test schedule to me was critical. A driver has to be confident in the vehicle to be able to take it to Pikes Peak where there's so much risk, and you're only going to go fast if you're comfortable in the vehicle. We go to a track that this car is never designed for. I had guys scratching their heads, why are we here? But you need to understand and relate it to the race course. And though Pikes Peak is a 12-mile track course, it's 3 different sections, 3 different courses within that one race. So going to Horse Thief gives us a foundation of low-speed front grip and rear mechanical grip coming off tighter corners. And that is a resemblance of the end of section 1, the entire middle section, and then really a couple of corners on the upper section.
Talk me through it, coach.
His experience with the platform, his understanding of what the car needed, gave me a neutral foundation to start with, so close to what I just needed to add a couple of tweaks.
First thing with a 911 is to settle the rear down, you know, so I always focus there, and then as I get to know the driver and their capabilities, start to dial in more front grip. So we really brought him up nice and slow, and the chassis as well, with him, to where I realized he was comfortable, because he started calling out changes to the car, anticipating what I was going to do. You know, when he started doing that, I got really excited. There was really never a push-pull scenario. We just kept moving forward and getting better and better and better.
My first experience of cracking the gears going around the streets of Willow. To put it into 3 words, what I said in my head under my helmet is, oh, hell yeah.
He's feeling it, you know, and he was trying to make the car do things on track that weren't related to lap times. you could see it. He'd be out there and he would, all of a sudden start going slow, and then he'd go fast, and then he'd go slow, and trying to reduce airflow of the car but increase load. So it really helped us with getting the scientific approach of cause and effect. What's this going to do? What's that going to do?
We've made changes to cambers, we've made changes to the rake of the vehicle, we've made changes to shock settings, and it's really starting to develop into a car that I'm really confident in.
That's why we never misstepped, and we're able to keep moving forward and getting more and more efficient and faster.
Joey did a great job. We were running only low power to begin with. We just took a normally aspirated engine and we just made it twin turbo. We're putting so much more load from torque and horsepower and heat demand that water temperatures, oil temperatures, and everything were going thermal. Not to a point that we were damaging anything, but we were just needing more of a sealing security to control those temperatures. And then we kind of went through, I wouldn't say negative experiences, but growing experiences. The mountain tests are just absolutely critical if you're passionate, if you're invested, and if you're serious. And it was really exciting to have both mountain test weekends that made up 5 mornings on the mountain rolling into race week. At that point, if you're dialed and you have everything checked, you can pretty much do a rinse repeat on race week and just add tenths of a second of improvement. Tuning was probably the biggest challenge on getting the engine calibration dead right. We had engineering present and those guys were doing a great job. It just really was reliant on me giving them feedback. Really, for me, it's not about making horsepower. You need response, you need torque, and that's exactly what this package had. Joey and the guys had done a great job. We got a good foundation, a good understanding of the chassis, and we were right where we needed to be at that point on times. You never know what the weather's going to do. You want to be faster than everyone. If the weather's great, then you can push for an overall record.
We were probably the most prepared car there. Really, honestly, Rhys was just having fun and getting familiar with the car on the mountain. And as we got quicker and making more power, we really got to a level that I've never, ever tried before. But that was me trusting Rhys. Once we had that, it was all fun. I've never had so much fun, from him getting out of the car and laughing, and talking about different turns. And we got to a point that we were very happy. We had often quickest times in practice overall. Then it was just time for race week. Even before the tire test, the private tire test at Pikes Peak, we spent a day at Aspen Motorsport Park with Jeff Zwart driving. And the reactions from him were fantastic because he's like, I wish you never let me drive this car. I'm ruined. He's like, this is easier to drive than the 935-19, which that was always his statement on the 935 was how easy and carefree it was. For us to have much more horsepower, much more aero, much more everything, and have him say it was predictable and easy to drive was awesome. And he also said, you have a sub 9-minute car.
I remember hopping out of the car and going up to Joey, giving him a pat on the back after that first session with full power and everything working, and just kind of saying, we've got a race car.
I hope you guys enjoyed part 2. Joey and I are actually going to dig into the mechanical parts of the build. I hope you guys enjoy it. Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of this 3-part series. We are at Emotion Engineering. We have this crazy Porsche GT3R that ran Pikes Peak 2022, the 100th running, and my good friend Joey Seeley is here. We actually talked a lot about the body and the aero in the first episode. This time, I actually want to talk about the mechanical aspects. The center, and really the thing that you guys really dug into, was a power plant for this. Tell me about what you're running here.
It's a Metzger, what started as a 3.6 liter 997.1 GT3 street motor. For most of the Metzger big horsepower guys, like the half-mile airstrip attack stuff, that's the choice motor because it's got the bigger heads and the valve train, all that.
Yeah, because like that's the last one, right? Like 997.2 was already 3.8.
So that was a 3.8, and it had variable intake and exhaust. And in this turbo configuration, you don't want the variable exhaust. If I remember correctly, we lock duration, but we still have the variable timing. So that's where it started as a 3.6. We turned it into a 3.8. Obviously different connecting rods and pistons, something stronger, head studs, head gaskets, all that kind of stuff. Put the twin Garrett G35 1050s with it, which are absolutely massive. Obviously, we're trying to feed in as much of the thin air up at high altitude. So you want a large turbo, but that's also, that creates a lot of lag. So we worked with Garrett very closely and our engine tuner and engine builder and came up with a different exhaust housing that would help the turbo spool quicker. So this thing is extremely responsive and makes 1,200 at the crank. So this made 1,000 wheel here at sea level.
At the base of Pikes Peak, what does it make?
I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to ask the tuner, just a theory. I would say we probably raced at about 850 to 900 horsepower.
And then by the time you got to the top,
we had it about the same. So
really?
we were, yeah, you're measuring air density as you're going. So you just keep ramping up boost, duty cycle on the turbos. So
and that's the advantage to having a setup like this versus obviously an NA car just loses power
right
as it goes up. And one thing that I didn't realize up until recently is that electric vehicles too, the batteries heat up, the motors heat up, and obviously there's less juice altogether. And then you have that degradation, even though it doesn't matter if it's less air, it is slower over time. But this, you're pretty much trying to battle that, huh?
Yes, we're battling air density. But then, like you said, electric is not affected by air density, but you do have to cool those motors, so then now add in air, and how a radiator is not very effective, so you have to really come up with the most effective way, the most efficient way. And that goes oil coolers, radiators, intercoolers. And in this case, we did something that I've never seen anyone do. And I spent a lot of time designing that as well as just this boost strategy. Because not only do you want efficient cooling, but you want better weight distribution if you can. It's a 911. We don't want any more weight on the rear. We actually move the intercoolers inside the car to move weight forward, but also we turned the intake manifold around backwards and ran the throttle body into the car to meet the intercoolers. So overall, it was about 30% less distance from turbo to throttle body and moved, 50 pounds, a good 3 feet forward from where it used to be.
You're able to do all this because you're building this for Pikes Peak. It's not like you're building it for a couple different series. What would this be considered?
This was for open class. It's pretty much whatever goes. I think the limitation is aero, and even that is not very limited. It's like 12 inches above the roof line, 12 inches behind the bumper, and 12 inches in front of the bumper, which we haven't maximized. The limitation is it can't be wider than the contact patch of the tires. And that's about it. I don't think there's really any other rules for that class. We were able to do whatever we wanted. This would work fine for another series, because it's all about efficiency, and efficiency always works. The only way this doesn't work is honestly, this is a lot harder to work on than a normal GT3R. So if you were doing endurance racing, we'd have to run less boost to not generate so much heat and put less fatigue on the car. But honestly, if you have to work on something, it takes easily 3 or 4 times longer than originally, when this car was stock.
Yeah, and because when this was stock, how much power did the stock motor make?
They make about 500 horsepower, 500, 550.
But of course it was built to run for 24 hours.
Yeah,
Right.
Flat out for 24 hours.
It's just crazy to me because what you're doing is you're really pushing the limit of this chassis too.
Yeah.
By running that much more power. It's pretty cool.
It's super cool. I mean, it was fantastic that, to think the stock transmission from a GT3R, the Ricardo, it's a sequential gearbox, is strong enough to handle, what are we at, 900 foot-pounds of torque or something like that. So pretty amazing, especially with that Pikes Peak, how bumpy it is. You can make a lot of horsepower and a lot of grip, but then you have to also handle the bumps, which has really taken its toll on a lot of people. We have a very good approach to that. Me and Rhys have the same mentality when we approach Pikes Peak. He actually said, I never had wheel spin that I didn't intentionally induce myself. So 900 horsepower in a two-wheel drive car and not breaking traction unless he wanted to.
What's cool to me is this actually looks like a Formula Drift car in that, a lot of the Formula Drift cars run rear radiator setups.
Yeah.
This is the biggest oil cooler I've ever seen.
Yeah. So, I mean, like you make big horsepower, you're going to start raising water and oil temps. And we divorced the system. It used to have a water oil heat exchanger on the engine. So we got rid of that and thought this would be a better strategy. And actually, this was our biggest, the bane to our existence is we went through 3 or 4 different variations until we came up with this. That's why, we have a wet layup scoop feeding the cooler and a wet layup scoop, evacuating, because we didn't have time. We ran out of time and resources and just had to get something done. It worked, but for next year, I'd like to change it up a bit.
Well, the big reason why we're here is because we're doing this series with Pennzoil, and you're running Pennzoil in this car. How much oil are you running in this?
I don't even remember. It's significantly more than the car used to have. It had an oil tank, a sump on the engine, which didn't really fit when I turned the intake manifold around backwards and ran the throttle body the other direction. It was going to run right into the oil tank. So we moved the oil tank inside the car. So it's a 3-gallon aluminum oil tank. Similar in strategy to moving the intercoolers inside the car, we moved the oil sump inside the car, but in the passenger seat area. So better weight distribution, more capacity, and more capacity helps with cooling too. So just more water, just more oil is going to help cool.
You're telling me it's 3 gallons, or is it more than 3 gallons?
Oh, it's more than 3 gallons. We have about 16 quarts of oil. So it's quite a bit more, because I believe it was like 12 originally.
That's so much oil.
Yeah.
I mean, but you need that. Like you said, it's like you're trying to cool the oil down, and you're also trying to cool the water down.
Yeah.
Part of the thing is what a lot of people don't realize, you mentioned air density. It is so much less oxygen and air in general up there, right? When you're actually at the peak, it's 40% less.
Yeah.
And the problem is you just have way less air to take the heat away from the engine.
Yeah, that's why everyone goes even big aero. Is because you're working with less air to push the car down or suck the car down. Your radiators need more surface area because there's 40% less air going through them. That's why we address capacity as well. So more water, more oil, and that helps with the equation.
I know on these cars, especially, the rear brakes do so much, as well as the front, just because of the bias, right? The weight bias, and just the way Porsches are built and the way they drive.
These came with PFC brakes, the factory race cars do, but we wanted something specific for Pikes Peak because it is so specific. And part of that is the cold mornings, so we want to generate heat as quickly as possible. So over the years of doing this race, which I've been doing it for about 10 years now, I've worked closely with a friction specialist friend, and we've come up with a compound that we really like, that holds up well, but also just generates a lot of heat quickly. So that initial bite is there, going into the first corner. But with PFC, they have a proprietary pad shape, so you can't make your own, pad compounds. So we partnered with Alcon, and they make a brilliant and beautiful brake system, and we worked very closely with them on proportioning this kit to work on the mountain and to generate heat quickly and have a rotor that held the heat quickly.
What people don't realize is this is another big issue with Pikes Peak. Again, you can't get rid of the heat fast enough, but also it being a hill climb, people think, oh yeah, it's probably easier on brakes. No, it's insane on brakes. And even though you're going uphill, these cars still have crazy glowing rotors because of how much heat is generating when you're actually stopping this thing.
Yeah, a lot of heat is generated, especially with no air to cool them down. So yeah, you will see glowing orange. But in this case, the way we have this car, we don't have any cooling. We've deleted all the original cooling that the car had and just let the rotor and the natural airflow around it work well. So it's great at Pikes Peak. On a road course for an extended period of time probably wouldn't work, but that's an easy change. But for Pikes Peak, this was a specific Pikes Peak build.
What about the wheel and tire setup? I know you have the wets on right now.
Yeah, we have the rain tires on right now, but like we mentioned, it's pretty fantastic to be able to run a 325 squared, on all four corners. And we had no issues with grip. I've been engineering these cars for 22 years, and Rhys and I went in a direction that I've never gone before. Because we were creating so much power and so much grip, we really were overpowering the front of the car. And we had a pretty big understeer issue that we got away from, and we still know where we would like to go for next year to improve it even further. In the first tests, Rhys said, "Joey, I swear to God, the front wheels are lifting off the ground."
Because of how fast it's accelerating.
Just because they're accelerating and squatting so hard, because we have a very soft and compliant setup. That's our approach there. But we had to slowly ramp up, more and more support from the rear of the car.
Because Porsches, of course, are rear heavy, but you've moved a lot of weight inside.
Yeah.
What is the ideal ratio, and were you able to change it a lot?
Well, I think the consensus, is a 50-50, weight distribution is what people shoot for. To have a 65-35 setup would not be optimal, right? But the 911 is the most successful car in history. So a rear engine does work. We improved it from 65-35 to 60-40. Which is fantastic, and I have plans to do even more for next year, because it will benefit us on the mountain to get front grip with a little more weight in the front of the car. In pro racing, it's part of why they can go so deep into the brake zone so late and then get back to the throttle so much quicker. They don't have to rely on just roll speed where a lot of cars do. They have to get into the corner, wait to get through it, and then accelerate out. There's less of that wait time in a 911.
And that's probably one of the big reasons why you're able to put all that power down, even though it's just rear-wheel drive.
Yeah, because there's all that weight sitting over the rear wheels, but also transitioning over the rear wheels as well. But we had an overabundance of that.
So did you have to modify any of this stuff at all?
So up here, the only real difference is, we got rid of the fuel fill through the hood, because, we're not doing pit stops.
Yep.
The fuel cell is completely changed, to handle ethanol, larger fuel pumps and lift pumps and filters and all that stuff. Everything else up there is original. The race cars also don't have a fan, and we wanted every bit of help we can get between runs, as well as the slow speed corners, and the W's. What you can see is original.
So did you have to get new shocks or anything like that? Was that all part of it?
So as you know, I've been working with KW for over a decade now, a decade and a half. These cars come with KWs, and that's who I trust, and I can engineer these in my sleep. So we just sent these back to KW for servicing, but also to lengthen them, because you've seen these race cars up on the jacks, the air jacks. The wheel is not drooping very far, which is great on a road course, but at Pikes Peak with the bumps, you want to keep the wheel on the ground. So I wanted as much droop travel as possible. So we lengthened these 1.5 inches in the front and 2 inches in the rear. So on the air jacks, they barely don't touch the ground anymore.
So this is the actual intercooler setup here.
Right. So these are CSF intercooler cores, and they supplied them to us. The sizing is specific to our power output, et cetera. And then we designed the end tanks, as well as that merge, and then that's where it goes through the throttle body. The throttle body is just behind this, that little bulkhead. The water
right here.
Yeah, so the throttle body's here instead of back here.
Okay.
The filtered air comes in through here, straight down to the turbo.
Right.
And then it charges the air down there, and it spits it right back up into these.
Here.
Yep.
Got it.
Goes
right there.
through the intercooler.
Yeah.
And then it merges with this side, and it goes right into the throttle body. So the turbo's right there, throttle body's right here. That's pretty short. whereas it used to have to travel behind the car.
So this is an air to water setup.
Right, the water goes through this way. You can see the AN fittings on these. That's pumping the water through. So the water is exchanging the heat from the air as it passes through it. And then the water goes up to the front of the car in front of the radiator. There's a heat exchanger stacked
So
in
then,
front.
does it cool the air charge first, then the motor?
Oh, no,
It's separate,
completely
separate.
divorced. Yeah, it's its own cooling system.
So this is more efficient than using air to air.
Yeah, significantly. We don't have an intake air change.
Where is the actual intercooler cooler?
So the heat exchanger for the intercooler is in front of the radiator. So this right here is the radiator.
Got it.
From PWR. And then PWR also made us the heat exchanger up front. So they're stacked
How cool
one
is
in front of
that?
the other.
That is awesome. So then, I see, because, like, what does this cool then? Does this go
That
to
was
another?
the brake duct, which we don't use anymore.
So it just exits.
So it's pumping air along the frame rail and then out through the back of the fender. So it's a pass through. It used to be plumbed to a big neoprene hose that would hook to the wheel, which we just didn't hook up. So
Do you have any other coolers up here then? You don't need like a power
No,
steering
and that's
cooler or
kind of what I
anything?
would like to do for next year is get rid of that oil cooler on the back of the car and run 2 separate oil coolers up here to move that weight. And also now you're running hoses, the lines and more oil capacity. So that's one of the things we'd like to do for next year.
The NACTA duct that you created here is more for the intakes then.
Right. That we never got around to making an airbox, but then again, now the whole canopy of the car is an airbox.
Yeah.
We didn't need it separate, but it was really just, we ran out of time and resources. But
I bet the sound in there has got to be insane.
Oh, yeah.
The turbo noises coming out of, because Rhys is essentially sitting in the airbox.
He's sitting in the airbox.
So cool. How cool is that?
These are only for the air inlets.
Huh, okay. So what is this for?
That's a header tank for the air-to-water intercoolers. So this is basically the vent tank, so that it all burps out and doesn't get locked up. Right now, if we started it and it didn't have this, the pump wouldn't run.
Got it.
So this allows it all to vent and then it recycles back down. Any bit of overflow water that goes into this goes back into the tank, which that silver box is the water tank for the intercoolers. And then this box here, that's just basically a firewall box. In there is the oil sump.
We have a lot more to talk about on the inside. Instead of going into the inside, I think we'll save that for the last episode. Episode 2, done. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to support us directly, go to larrychenprints.com. I print and sign every single one of these. This is the perfect gift, or it's the perfect piece of art for your wall.